Dude, that went so freaking well. As this channel has evolved, one of my main goals has become to show people the real-world use of some of these music gadgets by someone who aspires to produce music at a high level. The other night, I unlocked a new level of real-world use. I played my first live set in front of a live audience. And I don't want to gas myself up too much because it was my first show and I've still got a lot to learn, but it went really freaking well. People seemed genuinely really into it, and getting to connect with an audience in that way and get them hyped was one of the coolest feelings, and I'll definitely be chasing that feeling playing more shows in the future. But in the meantime, I'll content myself with talking about how it went, what I think I did right, and some stuff that I could do better in the future. So first, the setup. I was running my dual Novation circuit setup on top of a lightweight DJ table with the output of the circuit rhythm going into a mixer that fed the PA, and then the headphone out of the rhythm going into this little Volbox volume attenuator, which let me set the level of my headphone output independently from the output of the circuit itself. I monitored with Truth Ear Hexa in-ear monitors. What I played was a 45-minute long techno set that I've been developing publicly on this channel, and there are walkthroughs and playthroughs of the first 2/3 of the set that I played. The last third I've been developing pretty recently, and I'm going to do some videos on that in the future. I'll link some of those at the end of this video if you want to check those out. But at this point, you might be thinking, well, why the circuits? Why not the Akai Force sitting behind you? The reason I went with the circuits is their flexibility. They allow me to have a wide variety of sounds that I can switch between, a lot of hands-on control, allowing me to build up an arrangement and tweak stuff on the fly. And you know what? That setup performed incredibly well. They're not perfect. There's some jank to deal with, like the fact that I had to trigger scenes on both devices at the same time, and that had me a bit nervous that I would mess that up, but that ended up going completely without a hitch. Absolutely no problem. I had built up the muscle memory to make that work because I practiced this set a lot. Some hardware heads will take the approach for live hardware setups of having something that's very improvisational, maybe something that evolves slowly over time. And while I have an immense amount of respect for that, that's something I did not want to do. I wanted to have tracks that I was confident sounded cool and had a strong groove that could get an audience moving. And I wanted to have distinct songs, albeit ones that flow together really cleanly in a way that only a setup built from the ground up with that in mind can. And most importantly, for my approach to building up this set was I wanted to take my audience on a journey. I wanted to have the energy level rise over time and result in some big dramatic moments and switch ups. And that was the thing I think went the longest way towards making my set really memorable in the minds of my audience. My biggest worry, other than worrying about people just not being all that into it, which fortunately did not come to pass, was that I would mess up one of these big moments. But fortunately, I had the muscle memory and the musical memory to pull all of them off in a live setting under pressure and have that go super smoothly, which was awesome. And those big dramatic moments had the desired effect. They got people hyped, which was really freaking cool. I definitely had my finger on the pulse of what kind of music people were expecting because I had been to a rave at this location in the past. And while I was there, I was, in addition to just dancing and having a great time, taking mental notes of, ooh, that was cool. That made my brain light up. That made me want to push through my tiredness and keep dancing. And I tried to replicate those elements in my set. Keep things fresh, keep things moving, keep things exciting and novel. And partially because I knew that I was eventually going to be playing this live, and partially because I was just really vibing on that style of music, I very deliberately tailored the style of music to something that I knew people would be down for. And that really paid off. The only parts that I was nervous for were the kind of slow start. We start off like 125 BPM, kind of tech house meets synthwave inspired, and then work my way up to 135 pounding techno, and then work my way up further to more kind of like 150, 160 hard techno inspired stuff. That slow start made me nervous because I was playing right after a DJ who had been playing kind of 135, 140 BPM techno, and I had to follow that up. And by that time, quite a few people had filtered into the room. So I was bringing down the energy level. So I had to just trust the process, trust my own intuition that I would be able to bring these people along for the ride, and sure enough, I was able to win them over. And to be fair, people were vibing to the first couple of tracks, which was super appreciated, but as I ramped up the energy level, the energy in the room really did increase. At one point, I was doing stuff on the circuits and looking down, and I start to feel the ground shaking, and I look up, and seemingly, from my vantage point, the entire freaking room was moving. It is one of the coolest things I have ever experienced, and the fact that I got to be kind of the instigator for that was so sick, and that's definitely a core memory unlocked for sure. While I wanted to keep things moving along at a decent pace, I also didn't want to self-sabotage by moving on from a section people were enjoying too quickly. So the beauty of the flexibility of this setup is that if people were into a section, I could let it ride for another 8, 16 bars and maybe just make small adjustments to keep things evolving a bit and keep things fresh. Then once people went from like this to like this, I knew, okay, move on. So, as you've probably gathered, this went really freaking well. It was probably the perfect first gig. It was a friendly environment. I knew quite a few people there, and there were quite a few strangers as well who didn't expect this little dude with his little setup to crank out some bangers, which I think actually worked in my favor. And I was very well prepared. I was able to hit people with what they were hoping for, give them an excuse to dance and have a good time, and as a result, I had a great time as well. There were a couple of things that I could have done better, though. For one thing, I did hit the wrong project a couple of times, once near the beginning that I thought was pretty noticeable, and fortunately I was able to bail on that pretty quickly, and it was near the beginning, so I imagine by the time I was midway through the set at the really hype portions, people had already forgotten about it, but hey, I can always keep practicing and keep getting better. The other times I hit the wrong project, I basically just looped something a little awkwardly, like I cut off an 8-bar loop in the middle, and so there was a little 4-bar loop and then an 8-bar loop, and I doubt anyone noticed. Or when doing a transition, I accidentally just extended that transition more than I intended to. Once again, that's a thing of intent. No one knows what I was intending to do, so to their ears, it probably sounded fine. It's live. I've accepted that the more live something is, the more possibility there is of something going wrong, and all things considered, I'm pretty happy with how I did and how the setup performed. The big thing that I want to make sure I fix for future playthroughs of this set is cleaning up the low end, especially for the first like 2 or 3 tracks. It's a bit of a rite of passage for producers who also play live to hear their stuff played over a PA for the first time and go, holy hell, that is way bassier than I thought it was. And I knew this going in, and yet I was still slightly shocked when the first kicks and basses hit and they were boomier and muddier than I intended them to be. To be fair, I actually asked a couple of folks afterwards, like, how it sounded to them, and they were like, hey, I like that amount of bass. That sounded completely fine. So it wasn't a big deal, but to my ears, there was so much low end and rumbliness that it started to rob stuff of its punch and of its transience and of its impact, kind of falling apart a little bit into low end soup. It wasn't that bad, but that's what I was worried about. And so every time I would switch to a new project for the first couple of songs, I would be like emergency cutting low end on my kick and my bass. And I was careful when bringing in bass synth patches from the tracks because I didn't really have a great way of controlling the low end on that. So I'm just going to run through the whole set, try to spot check different aspects of the low end, clean it up a little bit. So hopefully that just won't be a problem in the future. Once I got to the more kind of techno-heavy sections, I had more distorted rumbly kicks that I had already cleaned up the low end pretty well on, and the distortion helped as well. So once I got deep into the set, I didn't really have to babysit it anymore, but I was always on high alert for it. I might also try just turning up the master filter to the high pass a little bit on the circuit tracks if it ever has to do a bass line. I'll see if I can get that to work. The other thing I would do differently, and this is kind of administrative, but I would bring extra audio cables next time. I'm a small artist trying to be active in my local music scene, so often I'll be performing somewhere that is a business that doubles as a music venue, and at this particular location, they were a bit low on audio cables, and I ended up having to just run mono circuit tracks into my circuit rhythm, and then run mono circuit rhythm into the mixer and ultimately into the PA. And we were also using my cable for something else as well when I wasn't playing. This ended up being totally fine. Running mono into the PA is not noticeable to anyone, including me, because the speakers were like at different corners of the room. You are not going to benefit from stereo. It was something I could have been more prepared for, but ultimately it worked out fine. I was running the circuit rhythm into a mixer that went into the PA, and the DJ just turned my signal up until it was reasonably loud, and I had the volume on the circuit rhythm cranked. So we just set my volume at a decent level, and then even when I got into the more intense sections, I still wasn't blowing out the speakers. The rhythm and tracks do have built-in compressors, which I think helps a bit, so I'm not too worried about adding any post-mastering chain, although I'm still tempted to try it. I'm worried about introducing latency, so we'll see if I actually go through with that. It worked totally fine as is. What I want the main takeaway of this to be, other than just celebrating the fact that I got to do a cool thing that opened up a new chapter in my musical journey, is this can be done. These small, relatively limited devices can be used to crank out bangers that can get a whole room moving. With enough preparation, enough kind of knowing your audience, and enough attention put on good dynamics and dramatic moments, this can work and be a cool, unique thing that can totally stand beside competent DJ sets. It was awesome to be able to take this from the bedroom studio and into the real world and have it work. So if you'd like to see what went into the making of this set, from the technicals to the musicality, you can check out these videos up over here. And if you'd like to hear the first 2/3 of the set, you can check these down over here. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back with a new video in a little bit.